Hi and welcome back to Cheeky Crypto. Today we're going to be taking a look at Bitcoin here. We're going to start things off with this weekly chart, right? Bitcoin paired with the USDT and Binance is our data source, right? So we're going to take a look and see what's going on here when it comes to Bitcoin. And on this weekly chart, I just want to kind of acknowledge these impulse waves to the upside. This has been in play pretty much since the end of the bull run of 2017, 2018, right? We can see that we bottomed out towards the end of 2018, and this is actually where we started to see the reversal. Even the crash of March 2020, which was the second wave here for Bitcoin, was unable to actually bring it down lower than it was over here, right? So significant motions have been in play for quite some time when it comes to Bitcoin. The third wave has been quite substantial for Bitcoin here as well. We saw lots of sideways trades occurring as we started to push the price up. We saw a couple of dips that actually allowed us to continue the growth, as there was a fair bit of manipulation when it comes to the Wyckoff accumulation and Wyckoff distribution, okay? This actually then topped up with pretty decent levels here, with the third wave hitting that $65,000. Now, one of the things that we can obviously acknowledge is we actually run out of steam much earlier on in the bull the bull run of this particular third cycle, right? This third wave to the upside. And what we actually saw here was an oversold area, right? We took the stochastic RSI all the way up to the overbought area. Then we actually lost momentum during this dip here, right? And this dip was actually a very substantial one because it actually took us right the way down into these lower areas on the stochastic. But we actually continued to push the price up just through FOMO and all that kind of good stuff. So, and we actually ended up seeing here was, the volume kind of dropping off a little bit and kind of, artificially being pushed to the top here through manipulation. Obviously, you had things like Tesla and things like that, and Elon Musk, and basically, commenting good news just at the right time as we're starting to come back down from here. Basically, people were setting it around this area, right? I remember like 45K, 42K around this area was absolutely key for many people in the space. They were obviously looking at all the technicals, seeing that this is actually a pretty good area to see some kind of pullback, right? We saw a small pullback, and then we obviously saw a more of a push to the upside. So when wave 3 finally came in, and Elon Musk said Tesla would no longer accept Bitcoin, and obviously we started to see China's crackdown, all that kind of stuff. We then saw the correction come in, but we're already oversold, right? We're heading down to this oversold area, so we actually reached all the way down to these incredibly low areas of 0.8 on the chart during this particular low area here, right? So we're oversold for quite some time. We're held down here as well. This started to form a Wyckoff accumulation after the distribution, that got then abandoned later on in the cycle here, right? And what we ended up seeing was people expecting the price to drop down to $20,000. Some people actually expecting the price to drop down significantly lower than that. But actually what you ended up finding was as soon as you broke support level and actually took it below the 30K and went down to like 28, and loads of people were shorting, right? So actually that was the kind of the trigger to actually send it right back up again, liquidating all the people who were shorting, right? And basically if you're using leverage, one of the major dangers is of course that you are going to basically lose your position because you'll be susceptible to that, right? And basically they had the accumulation then ready to go and basically started to push the price of BTC back to the upside, right? So what you actually saw was people who were shorting get liquidated, and if you were smart enough to go long at that point, then obviously you were doing very well. Now we're up against resistance right now. As we kind of record this video, we have been for the last couple of weeks, right? We can see that we started trading sideways. We're back up into the overbought area in the same way that we were over here. Obviously, we can stay up here for a while, but on this weekly chart, we have to acknowledge that we are in overbought territory here from the stochastic point of view. But we do need to couple this with the normal, regular relative strength index, as we are in a more of a trend than a sideways trade. So here we can actually see that we have a still, pretty decent traction, but there is overall loss of momentum, right? We can see that kind of like a trend forming here, right? Ever since we were up at these highs, we started to decrease. But there was, of course, if I actually grab my trend line and spread this out, it's really clear on the hourly, but we basically just went above the trend line a little bit here, right? So if that continues, then that would be good. We'll check it on the daily where you get a little bit more of a clearer view. But ultimately, things are looking pretty good on the daily and obviously the hourly views. But we always get into that in a moment. The weekly view, I think, we could see a little bit more of a push to the upside, but we have to be aware that we are due a correction. And that correction could be something like this one that we've seen previously, or it could be just sideways trading for a period of weeks until we actually get some decent traction behind it. Again, we basically need to come and lower some of these technicals of the relative strength index and, of course, the stochastic, okay? So right now, being quite high on the stochastic and reasonably high on the relative strength index, we are obviously aware that we are expecting a some kind of pullback to happen here with BTC in the next little while, right? So a few weeks, we should see some form of correction happen. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the price is going to correct massively to the downside. But what we mean by this is the technicals have to correct. We have to see the stochastic and relative strength index. You have to see these things get corrected down to nice, stable levels. We can again take a look at the volume, and this is backed up by loss of momentum overall. Since this kind of recovery has started, we got a couple of weeks of good volume, and then we started to lose that volume straight away, right? So that momentum, that sentiment just isn't quite there at the moment. We aren't quite above that 50k level, and as a result, we are kind of hesitant to kind of push more money into it. Now, the resistance for Bitcoin does come in on the 618 area of the Fibonacci retracement tool. So we'll jump into that now. We'll just jump down to the daily view. And actually, before we do that, we want to talk briefly about what the price expectation is, right, on this weekly chart, because we do have price expectations currently marked out at $182,000 for this bull run. That's where we see things peaking out in this fifth wave, right? So there's still a lot of growth here for Bitcoin. 185k is what we're talking about. Have been talking about this for a while now. So hopefully people are pretty comfortable with that. It's in line with the stock to flow model and all that kind of good stuff. So that's where we kind of think the bull run is likely to end here, when things really go parabolic for Bitcoin, really peaking out nice and strongly, and then obviously getting into the bear market from there. So let's go now into our daily view. We'll expand this up, and we can see a couple of things, right? One, we can see this relative strength index has basically now started to have a pretty good traction to the upside here, but we are looking for that recovery or pullback to basically correct this relative strength index after the recovery that we've seen so far. If we zoom on out here, what you can see as a part of that trend line on this relative strength index was this trend line that finally got broken, and we started to really get some decent traction about here, and we pushed right to the upside, right? So we know that there is no longer a bear scenario once we broke that trend, and the sentiment in the market was pretty good at this point here on this relative strength index. And when we switch this out and we actually put on here the stochastic relative strength index, again, you can actually see that we're heading a little bit further down, right? More price sensitive. We can see that there is loss of momentum here as well on this shorter term view. You can see that here. So we are again looking to track down a little bit with this, and again, we're nice and oversold at the moment, so a small bounce to the upside. Maybe we'll come into this oversold area before we really do trigger a nice move to the upside. So the daily chart here is looking really good. Obviously, the stochastic is more sensitive to price movements than the relative strength index, so we have to couple both of them together depending on what kind of scenarios are playing out. The other thing that's really important that we acknowledge here, and we'll take a look at this on the hourly, but we have an upward trend and a downward trend here, basically creating a triangular wedge, right? And we can see that this is something that we obviously have to acknowledge within the chart. So when we actually expand this up, you can see that there's a decent kind of downward trend with a decent upward trend, 3 touch points on the upward and 2 on the down. And this kind of intersects together on the 3rd of September, right? So one of two things will happen by this point. If I grab my brush here, one of two things will happen. We'll trade inside here and then break to the upside, or we'll trade inside here and then break to the downside, right? And this is all dependent on what else is happening in the space. I think at the moment, it's really difficult to say one way or the other whether it is going to be pushing up or pushing down. I think it's a bit too early to tell. But I think coming into the beginning of September will be the tell. We'll either completely lose this trend line, and if we lose this trend line, I am more keen to say that we are looking to find a support line much lower. And again, we take a look at where the history has kind of sat us before with Bitcoin, and there's a few areas of interest, right? 44k comes into mind, and all the way down here at 42k is another area that we'd also be looking at, right? And this kind of level of correction taking us all the way to this bottom area here is exactly what you need to correct our weekly chart, right? And of course our daily and our hourly will obviously be heavily corrected at the same time, and then we can get a serious good amount of traction from this area, right? So although there's potential short-term kind of pullbacks, there's huge gains to be made on a swing to the upside, okay? So although it can be a little bit disheartening to see this happen, I do think it's a very, very natural and something that we do have to see. We cannot move up in straight lines forever. You have to see these corrections come in. And obviously right now we are looking for a bit more of a pullback than maybe we would be looking for normally. With that being said though, if the volumes do continue to drop down and stay nice and low the way they are, then actually what you could find is actually just trading sideways here and just not actually going down that low at all, and then having a break to the upside later. Okay, so again, just because we have these trend lines are the easiest things to invalidate. So we use them, in conjunction with resistance and support lines to help give us a bit of an idea and a bit of a flavor as to where things are going, right? So on here, I'm just quickly going to draw on another horizontal ray just about here. This is another support line that we're seeing at 46k. So if we're looking for a sideways trade, we could potentially bounce from this area here and actually continue and then invalidate both of these trend lines altogether within a short space of time. So we'll leave that one on there as well. And again, we'll mark up an area just down here as well, because there are a few areas of interest to me on this Bitcoin chart that I think are important that we acknowledge, right? So 46K, 44K, 42K, a little bit of 41, and then down to basically 40, right? So these are the areas of support. So when we talk about the fact that the volumes are nice and low, it really depends on the sentiment as to whether or not we're going to push down significantly, or whether or not we are just going to get some serious traction and push significantly to the upside. So there's a lot to play out here when it comes to Bitcoin. A little bit more time, another couple of days, and we should know for sure which direction things are likely to go, at least the higher probability of it anyway. Let's jump down into our hourly. Here we can obviously see a little bit more clarity around that upward trend downward trend line, and again the triangular wedge that is forming in here, right? So being overbought here on this this hourly chart, we are looking for pullback. And we're looking to find support on this line. If we don't find the support and we've invalidated that straight away, then our upward trend is basically already taken out of play. And as a result, then we'll be looking for our support that come in at about 46,200, okay? So this area here is another interesting area that we want to be watching for. If the support holds, then we can basically be in this triangular wedge. And then again, one of two things, we break to the upside, or instead we break to the downside, right? So lots of playing happening here. It doesn't have to happen down here either, right? We can see some like serious traction much earlier. We could just see it completely take out right away. But this is a technical area now that's getting interested. We're getting triangular wedged in. So we want to monitor that situation. The fact that we are overbought on the stochastic is interesting. We'll throw on the relative strength index as well. We can see that we're in a pretty decent position here. But again, if we actually grab hold of our trend line, you can see that it is a trend to the downside forming here, right? And if I actually just pull that in a little bit, you can see that we did spike above it briefly, but if I actually pull that more in line here, we'll just see if that actually plays out, or whether or not we actually get some decent traction above this trend. So loss of momentum overall, loss of sentiment in the space is quite clear from the relative strength index. We can also see that from the stochastic relative strength index, the fact that it is overbought. So these are both indicating that there's a potential high probability for a pullback, both on the stochastic that's overbought, and of course this downtrend that we are seeing here on this relative strength index. That coupled with this strong downward trend that we are seeing here, and of course this triangular wedge, we are looking at a potential pullback here for Bitcoin. But of course, you know, these things don't necessarily play out. We could see sideways trading as well. So in the next couple of days are going to be key as to see whether or not we hold our support here, or whether we're going to invalidate it straight away. But a correction is coming, in my opinion, for Bitcoin. And in doing so, we'll be in a pretty good position to accumulate a little bit more before potentially having a good spike back to the upside. And again, if we're ever in doubt on where Bitcoin is going in the kind of longer term play, it's important that we zoom out and we really pay attention to the Fibonacci retracement tools, understand that where we are and what we're fighting against and where we are going, right? 182K is the target. And if we actually expand this up and just zoom in on these weekly chart here, we can see that where we're coming up against is the key areas, right? We're up against the 618 area of the Fibonacci, right? And the support line comes in at 46K at the 50% retracement zones. Now, as you are familiar, guys, we often highlight the 618, the 702, and the 786 area of the Fibonacci retracement tool as the key areas of battle, right? This is where we are really struggling, right? This is where we, for many altcoins at least, want to see that closed candle above, right? We will need to get Bitcoin closed above the 786. This is the big bull flag that then takes us to the next level, right? And again, Fibonacci retracement tools, love them or hate them, every trader will be aware of them and will be utilizing them. So if they're trading Bitcoin, they'll be looking at these key technicals, right? Alongside with our relative strength index, our Bollinger Bands, our moving averages, right? We put the 200 EMA on there. We put on the 50 moving average, for example. They'll be using all of these technical indicators along with the Fibonacci retracement tool, indicating that we'll expect pullbacks on the 618 or maybe even the 702, etc. Right? So lots of things that you have to acknowledge. You might not like these tools, but they are heavily used by the traders. So you can see why these areas resonate so well when it comes to where these candles actually end up landing. So right now, although there are some interesting things happening on the daily and interesting things happening on the hourly, I do think that we are likely to see a pullback. and to what price degree we're yet to determine. That's going to happen in the next little while, but in due course we will eventually get a closed candle above here in the next few weeks to months, and then obviously we're into price discovery mode, right? 87k, 127, we are 123, sorry, 160k, and then 182, where I think we're going to peaking out this fifth wave. So guys, this is my Bitcoin update. Hopefully you have found it useful and informative. If you have, then hit the like button. I really appreciate that. If you are new, make sure you subscribe, tap the bell, select all notifications, and indeed you won't miss another update. Right, with that said, done, and out of the way, I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.